What if I told you that two little girls with a simple camera once convinced the entire world that fairies were real? I'm not talking about a movie plot. I'm talking about one of history's most bizarre, strange, but true stories. In 1917, a small English village became the center of a hoax that fooled even the creator of Sherlock Holmes himself. This is the unbelievable tale of the Cottingley Fairies. Let's set the stage. It's 1917. The world is in the throes of World War I in the quiet village of Cottingley, Yorkshire. Life is grim. Rationing is in full effect, and families are desperately clinging to any sliver of hope and magic they can find. It's in this atmosphere that our story begins with two cousins, 16-year-old Elsie Wright and 9-year-old Frances Griffiths. The girls loved playing by the stream, or beck, at the bottom of their garden. But Frances often came home with wet shoes and clothes, much to her mother's frustration. When asked why she kept playing by the water, Frances's simple, innocent answer was, "I go to see the fairies." Of course, no one believed her. Fed up with the teasing, Elsie and Frances decided they needed proof. They borrowed Elsie's father's camera, a bulky Midge quarter-plate camera, determined to capture what they saw. Now, this is where a simple childhood game spirals into a global phenomenon. The girls weren't trying to start a worldwide hoax. They just wanted to get the adults off their backs. Elsie was a talented artist who had worked in a photographer's studio, so she had some basic knowledge of photography. They went down to the beck, and when Elsie's father developed the photographic plates in his darkroom, he was stunned. The first photo showed Frances looking at the camera, while for small, winged figures danced on the foliage in front of her. He dismissed them as fakes, assuming Elsie had used her artistic skills to play a prank, but the girls insisted they were real. A couple of months later, they took a second photograph, this time showing Elsie sitting on the grass, reaching out her hand to a tiny, winged gnome. To our modern eyes, trained by decades of Photoshop and CGI, the figures look incredibly suspicious. They appear flat, two-dimensional, like paper cutouts. But remember, this was 1917. Photo manipulation was a highly specialized and rare skill. For most people, a photograph was a direct, unaltered window into reality. The public was hungry for wonder, for a sign that there was something more to life than the brutal reality of war. So, when these images started to circulate, they weren't just seen as a childish prank. They were seen as shocking, tangible proof of another world. The photos first gained local attention after Elsie's mother, a believer in spiritualism and the occult, attended a lecture on fairy life. She showed the photos to the speaker, and from there, the story took on a life of its own. The images were displayed at the Theosophical Society's annual conference in 1920. This is where they caught the eye of one of the most famous men in the world, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of the master of logic and deduction, Sherlock Holmes. Now here's one of the weirdest and most ironic facts of this entire story. The man who invented literature's greatest logical mind was a passionate spiritualist. Following the death of his son in World War I, Doyle found comfort in the belief that it was possible to communicate with the spirit world. For him, the Cottingley photos weren't just a curiosity. They were potential scientific evidence of supernatural beings. He believed fairies and spirits were part of the natural world, just existing on a different vibrational frequency that was usually invisible to the human eye. He thought that the innocence and psychic energy of children like Elsie and Frances might have made them visible. Doyle commissioned his own investigation. He sent the original glass plate negatives to photography experts, including technicians at Kodak. The experts were baffled. They could find no signs of double exposure or tampering on the plates themselves. While they couldn't confirm the fairies were real, they couldn't prove they were fake either. One report concluded, "These are straight, single-exposure photographs." There is no trace whatever of any studio work involving card or paper models. This was all the confirmation Doyle needed. In December 1920, he published an article in the Strand magazine titled Fairies Photographed, an epoch-making event. He presented the images as authentic, genuine evidence that fairies existed. The article was a sensation. Coming from a man of Doyle's stature, the story exploded. The world went crazy for the Cottingley Fairies. Of course, not everyone was convinced. Skeptics immediately pointed out the obvious flaws. They noted that the fairies had very fashionable 1920s hairstyles. They questioned why the winged figures were so stiff and why their wings didn't show any sign of motion blur, which you'd expect from something fluttering quickly. Critics argued the lighting and shadows were inconsistent. But for every skeptic, there were a dozen believers. The desire to believe was so strong that it overrode logic. People wanted magic, and the Cottingley Fairies delivered it. Believers argued that, of course, the fairies looked like paper cutouts. How else would a non-physical being manifest in our physical world? Any scientific objection was dismissed as the grumbling of cynics who lacked imagination. The girls were pressured to take more photos. In 1920, Doyle provided them with two new, better cameras and more photographic plates. Under intense scrutiny, Elsie and Frances produced 3 more pictures. One featured Frances with a fairy leaping in the air, another showed Elsie with a fairy offering her a flower, and the most famous one of all, the fairy bower, depicted a translucent cocoon-like figure that many believers interpreted as a fairy taking a sunbath. These new images only fueled the fire, converting even more people to the cause. For decades, the 5 photographs remained one of the world's great unexplained mysteries. The girls, for their part, largely kept quiet. They grew up, got married, and moved away, letting the legend of the Cottingley Fairies live on. They occasionally gave interviews, but stuck to their story, never once admitting it was a prank. And then, over 60 years later, the truth finally came out. In the early 1980s, with both Elsie and Frances in their old age, the pressure of maintaining the lifelong secret became too much. In a series of interviews and articles, they confessed it was all a hoax. The fairies were, just as skeptics had suspected all along, nothing more than cardboard cutouts. Elsie had copied illustrations of dancing girls from a popular children's book of the time, Princess Mary's Gift Book, added wings, and cut them out. They propped them up in the foliage using hat pins. It was that simple. They revealed how they had managed to fool the experts. By using Elsie's father's camera, they didn't have to return the original plates to a commercial developer who might have spotted the trick. They had fooled Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, Kodak experts, and the world with paper, scissors, and a couple of pins. They laughed about it, explaining it was just a bit of childhood fun that had spun completely out of control. They never wanted fame or money, they just wanted to stop getting in trouble for having wet shoes. But here's where the story takes one final, fascinating twist. Even after confessing that 4 of the 5 photos were faked, Frances maintained, right up until her death in 1986, that the 5th photograph, the fairy bower, was genuine. She insisted that on that day, she truly had seen and photographed real fairies. Elsie, however, dismissed this, saying Frances was just seeing things. Was Frances simply lost in nostalgia for a magical childhood moment? Or did she genuinely believe she had captured something otherworldly on that one plate? That lingering question is what keeps this strange but true story so captivating. It adds a layer of mystery that even a full confession can't quite erase. So what does the story of the Cottingley Fairies teach us? It's not really a story about fairies at all. It's a story about us. It shows how deeply human beings want to believe in something beyond the mundane, especially during times of hardship. It's a fascinating case study in psychology, confirmation bias, and the power of suggestion. When reality is bleak, even the most brilliant and logical minds can be tempted to embrace a beautiful illusion. The Cottingley Fairies Hoax sits at the crossroads of childhood innocence, adult desperation, and the eternal human desire for wonder. And that's what makes it one of the most unbelievable, weird, and enduring stories of the 20th century. A reminder that sometimes the greatest unexplained mysteries aren't out there in the woods, they're right inside our own heads. Thanks for joining me on this journey into one of history's most charming hoaxes. If you enjoy strange but true tales like this, packed with weird facts and bizarre history, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what we uncover next. See you in the next video.